in life there are acts of great faith and acts of great foolishness. And sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between the two. Well, several years ago, when I first began writing my book, The New Jim Crow, I felt that I was taking a great leap of faith. I was trusting that if people of faith and conscience had access to the history, the data, and the facts about the drug war and the myriad laws that authorize legal discrimination against people released from prison, that they would finally have the same kind of awakening that I did. They would begin to see the connections between the institutions of slavery and Jim Crow and the rise of mass incarceration. They would see the necessity of bold, courageous action to dismantle this new system with the fierce urgency of now. I desperately clung to the belief that people of conscience, people of faith could and would rise to this challenge. A time when staggering numbers of black and brown men and women fill our nation's prisons and jails, and yet a black man is now president of the United States. This paradox. I hoped and prayed, literally down on my knees, that if I could just finish the book, a seed would be planted right next to the many other seeds of hope and justice beginning to take root, and in time, people would begin to water these seeds, and a vibrant, multiracial, multi-ethnic movement for racial and social justice would emerge, a movement that would end not only mass incarceration, but would end the history and cycle of caste in America. Many people call the idea of my book project foolishness, including a few of my closest mentors and advisors. I was told that I was, quote, ruining my career, and that if I hoped to be taken seriously as a law professor and as an academic, I ought to stick to writing traditional law review articles and not marginalize myself as some kind of radical. And I must admit that after a while I began to believe that my dream was foolish, and I tried to quit writing the book. Writing it was so much more difficult than I had ever imagined, and I started to think maybe it wasn't going to be worth the effort. But Spirit was working in my life in ways that I did not fully understand. Every time I told my husband that I was giving up, for real this time, seriously, honey. Quite by coincidence, a letter would show up in the mail from a prisoner or a family member of someone who's behind bars, begging me, literally begging me to finish the book. I had given a few media interviews about my work in progress, and word had begun to spread. I began receiving letters from people trapped within the system, thanking me for telling the truth and begging me to finish my book so that awakening could begin sooner rather than later. One letter began, and I quote, "You're probably thinking about quitting, as I'm sure many people are telling you not to write this book, but do it anyway. Do it for those of us who no longer have a voice." I now see that I would have been a fool not to finish. A movement to end mass incarceration is, in fact, emerging in the United States, and while my book may not have been the catalyst, it is becoming an important tool, a tool that would not have existed if I had not listened to that voice whispering in my ears, the voice of my own conscience. Being here tonight, getting this invitation to speak to all of you, fills me with hope that my prayers and the prayers of so many other people in this era of mass incarceration are finally being answered. An awakening has begun. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. once said there is, quote, "nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution." And he was talking at that time about a profound moral revolution that was underway, a struggle for the recognition of the dignity and value of all humankind, a struggle to end America's latest caste system, then known as Jim Crow. And he told the audience a story of Rip Van Winkle, who famously fell asleep for 20 years. When he began his extended nap, a sign posted on the wall of a nearby inn had a picture of King George III of England emblazoned on it. But when Rip Van Winkle awoke 2 decades later, the sign had a picture of George Washington on it. Dr. King told the audience that the most striking fact about, the story was not that Rip had slept for 20 years, but that he had slept through a revolution. He said,